everybody. My name is Michael Saffer. I'm with the Hyde Park Historical Society and happy to see you all here today. We have, I think, a very interesting program coming up with Patricia Morse. I have got everybody muted to cut down on background noise. We will be taking questions after the presentation, which we expect to last about an hour. And I hope that this program will get you interested in joining the Hyde Park Historical Society. You can see in front of you our membership levels and the link to our membership page. You can go ahead and I put the link, this link in the chat. So if you scroll up in chat, you will see that link. And we'd love to have you join us. Okay, one other announcement. The Hyde Park Book Club will be meeting tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. via Zoom. Registration is required, and that link is also in the chat. We'll be discussing Escape Through the Pyrenees by Lisa Fitko, who is a longtime Hyde Park resident that had a very interesting early life as an anti-fascist activist in France and Germany during World War II. So that should be a very interesting program. And now I am going to turn the screen over to Patricia and turn the introduction over to Dottie.
Hi. I'm pleased to introduce Trish Morse today, who has a PhD from the University of Chicago and who's presenting our great program today. After teaching American Studies and Literature at Union College, St. Lawrence University, and Michigan State University, she returned to Hyde Park, where she has served on the Executive Council of the Hyde Park Kenwood Community Conference, the Hyde Park Garden Fair, the Hyde Park Used Book Sale, and the Jackson Park Advisory Council. And most recently, she has developed a docent program at the Japanese Garden. She's an avid local historian, known to many as Hyde Park Trish. So welcome, Trish, and thank you.
Oh, thank you. So let me get this launched. So I'm going to hide you all so I don't get distracted. And if you have questions, do put them in the chat and we'll look at them afterwards. So yeah, so I wanted to start because I know there are a few people who aren't Hyde Parkers here. And so I wanted to start with a little orientation picture. So this is the, from 1951. So this is the basic landscape. This is downtown Chicago along the Chicago River. This is the Illinois Central Gulf Railroad, which is central to our story. And this down here is Hyde Park. And in particular, I'm circling where the Hyde Park hotels of the 20s are located. So this is the basic landscape. And what I'm going to do, because I know there are Hyde Parkers that have favorite hotels, but what this is going to be is a swoop through 150 years of history. So it'll move kind of fast, at least I hope so. And here we go. So first, here's a land acknowledgement statement. Hyde Park is located on the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. And this is an attempt in 1900 to reconstruct where the villages were and where the trails were and ceremonial mounds. And he made this a minor trail, but for us, this is a major trail. So I've emphasized it in black and added an arrow to indicate where our story is located here at the corner of 53rd and Hyde Park Boulevard, or the future corner. And I included this picture to let everybody know. So the lakefront, so what's important to the story is in fact the lakefront. And the lakefront was originally dunes, so it's moving sand, it's wetlands, and it's these old sand ridges from old dunes. And so what was important was the Potawatomi had figured out how to get from here to there on the ridges, so it was relatively dry. Which brings us to Hyde Park. So in 1833, there's a treaty of the Council of the Three Fires, and the Potawatomi are dispersed, and settlers move in. So one of the settlers is Nathan Watson. He is a farmer. He has a wife and 12 kids, and his dream is to have an orchard. But he puts his farmhouse on this trail, and so many people are walking along it and later driving along it. And they keep stopping at his house, and he gives up and he says, okay, I'm building a tavern. So he has Watson's Tavern, which was described as primitive in structure and primitive in menu. So it wasn't much, but it was a tavern. And meanwhile, we have Paul Cornell, who's the founder of Hyde Park, and he comes to Chicago, and he likes to ride for exercise out of the city center up by the river. And he comes down and takes breaks at Watson's Tavern. So he knows the Watsons and he knows the territory. When Stephen A. Douglas, US Senator from Illinois, pulls him aside and says, the railroad is coming, you really should buy some land south of my land and cash in. So he does. He goes to the Watsons and buys a hunk of their farm. And the railroad shows up. But for Cornell, what he has is a vision of turning this area into an elegant suburb of the city. And not, so his goal isn't to cash in on the railroad. His goal is to cash in on the real estate. So he makes a deal with the railroad that they can have their land for free if they build him a railroad station, essentially in the middle of nowhere, and guarantee that they will have 6 trains a day up to Chicago. And they make the deal. And he was right, that if you build it, they will come. So the next thing he does is build a grand hotel, Hyde Park House. And this is unusual because, well, hotels are pretty recent. They're started about 20 years before this. They were in urban centers. Before this, before hotels, what you did was stay in the second floor of taverns and inns, which weren't nice and weren't very homey. And these standalone hotels were respectable. They provided the comforts of home, and of course, a lot of them were luxurious. And they also had big private rooms, I mean, big public rooms where you would have like ballrooms and parlors and places where the public could gather and be entertained. And these are spreading around. There's a couple up in Chicago, but nothing is out in the middle of nowhere, but he puts his in the middle of nowhere. And the reason he wants it is he wants wealthy people to be interested in staying in his area and looking at the real estate. But he really doesn't want to run a hotel. So he leases it out to experts. And they do a good job. So by 1860, the Prince of Wales, who's doing a Grand American tour, stays in the Hyde Park House. And the delegates to the Republican National Convention in 1860, the one that nominates Abraham Lincoln, they're staying in the hotel. And then after the assassination, Mary Todd Lincoln comes and stays for a couple of months in the hotel. Of course, Hyde Park is kind of a hotbed of fans of Lincoln and friends of Lincoln, so that's not entirely an accident, but it is nice. And the guys who run it are very good at marketing. They turn to Chicago and they make it a destination. So not only do they have people residing there for short terms and long terms, but they have people coming down for Chicago for festivals and parties and just to stroll around. They landscape the park to the north. And they have festivals like Venetian Nights. So they have a big buffet spread, bands that play through the day. They have Japanese lanterns hanging from the trees, and they have fireworks. And then an excursion train goes back up to the city at 1 a.m. So these are big parties. There's thousands of people come to a French music festival, and they have a pier. So people come down, they like to walk out on the pier and listen to the soothing music of the waves, as the Tribune reporter says. So it becomes a beloved place to get out of the smells and heat and nastiness of the city itself fairly early. There's even a regular coach shuttle from the Palmer House down to Hyde Park House. And it also cements itself in the affections when in 1871, the fire, that there's so many homeless, they throw open the doors and take in just as many people as they can fit. So, so this is, as I said, it's cemented itself in the landscape of people, but then it burns to the ground in 1879. Burning and fires, particularly when the hotel frame is a constant fear. So the fire gets up to the roof, and the problem is the Hyde Park Fire Department doesn't have equipment that can handle a building this big, so they have to watch it slowly burn. So luckily there's no loss of life, but it turns into just rubble and lays there on the ground for 20 years. So there isn't anything for a little while. I mean, there are places to stay, but there isn't a grand hotel. And Cornell has land down on 51st Street, and he decides that, yeah, it's time for another one. This really functions for the community. People meet in the public rooms, commercial activity occurs, businesses, deals get done. He needs another grand hotel. So his house is right next door to this. This is the corner of 51st and Lake Park. So it's where City Hyde Park is now. And he goes cutting edge again. So he goes to Theodore Sterrett, who's a structural engineer that's worked with Burnham and Root for rebuilding downtown. And what Cornell wants is iron frame construction, because he wants to go thin and he wants to go high and he wants lots of windows. So this looks like a rectangle, but it's actually an L. It just goes along the two streets. And the reason they want to go thin and they want big windows is, again, this maximizing the pleasant summers by the lake and getting the most light into these rooms as they can get, though it does have electricity, which is kind of cutting edge in 1888. So Sterrett develops this look, and you can see that he's maximizing the light and air by creating these big bow windows, these big bow corners, and parapets that hide the water towers and the stuff on the roof. And the bottom where the public rooms are is marked off with limestone. And this look is copied all over the place in Chicago. So you see many, particularly hotels, but even some other buildings that start to look this way. But they don't copy the luxury that Cornell puts into it. So the lobby is like an ocean of marble. And the dining room is famous because it has this amber glass, Tiffany glass ceiling. And it gets to reign supreme for a whole 3 years before this happens. This is, of course, the Columbian Exposition. The Chicago gets the award to put it on in 1891, and building is frantic. You know, they're trying to build this 214 buildings of the fair. And also pretty frantic is building places for the millions of people who are going to come to stay. And people are trying to cash in on this idea. So it's all over the place. There's speculative building going on in the South Side, from the Loop all the way down to 85th Street. They are listing hotels and lodging houses. And I said over 1,500, but I've seen some lists that say they're 2,000. So this is just transforming the commercial streets of the South Side, but particularly Hyde Park and Woodlawn, the neighborhoods right by the fair. So instead of two-story wooden little structures for little stores, you know, these big brick structures, they're going up. They're going up really fast, so they're not necessarily well built, and there isn't much of a building code, so this becomes a problem later. This is the Beatrice Hotel, which is on the corner of 57th and Dorchester. So this is another hotel that, well, I got wondering, so who is trying to cash in? Who are these people? And one of the people I came across were the Waits. Charles Waite was an early law partner of Paul Cornell, an early citizen of Hyde Park, and he had moved in with Catherine Van Valkenburg Waite to Hyde Park. Catherine is a friend of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a fervent feminist, founder of the Illinois Equal Suffrage organizations, and she tried to vote in 1871, which in local elections, which wasn't successful, went to court, fought about it. And she has many, many projects to help the status of women. But while she's doing that, she discovers she has a knack for real estate. And so when the fair comes along, they say, yep, we're going to build a hotel. So this is on the corner of 53rd and Lake Park, and the long stretches along Lake Park. And you can see they pick up the ideas from the Hyde Park Hotel. You've got the big bays, the weird turrets. You've got all this, that standard look that he had developed. But this really isn't a grand hotel because they're packing in the rooms. They're packing in the customers. So this is 400 rooms without much wasted space on ballrooms and things. They make money. They sell it immediately after the fair. And one source says that they then moved to Colorado, which I kind of hope they did, because Colorado has the vote for women. And so Catherine would finally get into the voting booth. So what makes a hotel, and then what makes a grand hotel? This is actually fairly well hashed out. The question mark is always, so there are a lot of long-term residences in these things called hotels, but pretty much anything that's calling itself a hotel or is labeled a hotel by the historians is a place that's providing services, at least 3 stories, and it's providing these daily services. Then, of course, to be a grand hotel, the obvious would be the marble and Tiffany and all this fancy detailing that people have, and the really the sense of the comforts of home in the rooms themselves. But also, I realized what's really important in these is they provide public spaces. They have ballrooms, and of course they don't just have dances, they have political meetings and church fundraisers and community organizations. So they're fundamental to forming this sense of community in the neighborhood. And they're fundamental to the commerce, you know, because it becomes quite a commercial set of enterprises around them. And they provide, you know, smoking rooms and, you know, the various places where deals get made. And for the community, they provide entertainment facilities. Some of them are exclusive and they don't let people in, but most of them are providing these entertainment things for the community. So one of the things I want to note is all the hotels are open in 1891. That's because they're rushing to completion because they think the fair is in 1892. Well, the actual anniversary of Columbus bumping into America. But the fair isn't ready. And so they push it to 1893. And then it doesn't open until May. And then everybody knows it's not quite ready. So nobody really shows up for the fair until July. So there's a year and a half where they don't have the kind of customers they anticipated. And the ones that, you know, took out loans to, you know, build these luxury buildings are struggling. So even the Windermere is skirting bankruptcy early in 1893, but, you know, they pull out. And they're very high end. They have, of course, electricity, which these buildings, these high-end buildings are getting, but they also have a telephone in every room, which they claim to be the first in Chicago, but so does the Palmer House. So one of them is the first. It's very convenient to the fair. There's a ticket booth right across the street on 56. And also what's right across is the State Building. So it's a quiet part of the fair. And this seems to attract the more staid people with money here to the Windermere. So you have people like George Westinghouse, who's the guy who brings electricity to the fair. There's the Archbishop of New York and visiting European nobility. Also super convenient to the fair is the Raymond and Whitcomb Grand Hotel down on 59th Street, where International House is now. It's maybe a little too convenient. The Midway is famous for being a wall of noise, really raucous, loud into the night. Of course, we have the electric lights, so it goes till 11 at night. So you wouldn't have had a quiet stay, but you would have had a luxurious stay at the Grand Hotel. So Raymond and Whitcomb are actually travel agents. So you could stay there directly for just a few nights, but most people were getting travel packages. So if you lived in Philadelphia, you would get a travel package from Raymond and Whitcomb and what you would get for your package would be round trip train tickets. You would get a week's stay at the Grand Hotel, and you'd get 12 tickets to the fair. So that would set you back $3,000, which is at a time when the annual average income was $660. So this was for the very well-off. For the not so well-off, right next door is the Epworth, which was a completely temporary building, packed in the people, 560 rooms, and it was only for Methodists. So my great-grandmother went to the fair. I kind of think she might have stayed here at the Epworth. So one of the things that was an advantage to the Grand, to being here on the Midway, was on the very last day of the fair, it caught fire. And one of the things the fair had were state-of-the-art fire hydrants. So they were able to put it out, although they drowned the top floor. And it was, the whole spectacle gathered crowds of the fairgoers who applauded the Bedouins who came out of the Midway and were tossing people's trunks out of windows. So it was a kind of dramatic finale to the fair. The grandest of the local grand hotels for the fair was the Chicago Beach Hotel. So Warren Leland was the guy who is building that. Warren Leland is a resident of Kenwood. He has a chain, well, not chain, but he has two really luxury hotels. He has one downtown, he has one in Manhattan. And he's one of the movers and shakers that brought the fair to Chicago. He, however, wants, he has these urban luxury hotels. What he wants is, in this case, was a resort hotel of a different kind. And he wants a beach, but he has to find a beach. So he goes to his neighbor, James Morgan. James Morgan had bought a house to the east side of the tracks at 51st Street. And it only had 3 acres because the lake was right there. But what he did was he built a breakwater out into the lake. And so he's stopping the sand that's moving along these dunes, and it's piling up. And he digs out some other, and he's working on his sand. And so by the time Leland comes up to him, he's got 12 acres that he's created. So he leases the 12 acres to Leland for the Chicago Beach Hotel. And he also goes to stare at, and you can see he's got the that long, same narrow look to pick up the lake breezes, to have this nice sunlight. And, he has the big bays and he has the turrets, he has the look. This is really expensive. So most of the hotels that are listing themselves for the millions of visitors are charging $1 to $4 a night, and this includes meals. The Chicago Beach Hotel charges up to $15 a night. So this is for the really well-off. And people come and stay for months. So, there's a lot of rich people who came to the fair. And the fair was big enough that it paid off to come for that long. Leland made a profit. Leland, at the end of the fair, cleared the equivalent net profit of $7 million in our dollars. So the fair only lasts 6 months. Now what? You got 1,500 to 2,000 buildings that have been built to house people. Most of them become apartments, but some of them are definitely hotels, and they want to stay hotels, and they need a way to lure people in, to attract people to come to Hyde Park and stay, not just incidental travelers or local residents. And what happens is that the South Parks Commission, when they made the deal with the fair to come to the park, made them say that they would take the profits from the fair and completely redo the park. So it would be gorgeous. And they bring in Olmsted Sons. Olmsted was, of course, the original designer of Jackson Park. Olmsted Sons come in and they produce this plan and they redo the whole thing. So maybe one of the few times in its history, every part of it was gorgeous. You have these beautiful arched steel bridges, you have boathouses and equestrian trails and the rose garden and beautiful promenades along the beach. all kinds of athletic facilities, and the only public golf course west of the Alleghenies was set up in 1905. So it's got all of this recreational activity to offer, and the hotels cash in on that. They formed the Jackson Park Hotel Association. There's 25 hotels in it, and that's what they market is, we'll provide you with a lovely place to stay. We'll provide you with nice food. You can take the fast train down to Chicago and go to the theater and the stores. And during the day, you can use all of these amazing facilities in Jackson Park. And the hotel, the Grand Hotel that hammers on this the hardest is the Hotel del Prado, which is what the Raymond and Whitcomb Grand got renamed. They sold it and new owners. But they looked and said, okay, we need in particular to get people in the summer who would really want to come and spend the whole summer so we don't have to worry too much about turnover. And they decide to advertise to the people that are on the other end of the railroad, which is the, it's the Illinois Central Gulf Railroad. So they're advertising to Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi to come up and spend the summer in Hyde Park, where not only is it cooler than the Gulf, it's cooler than, downtown Chicago. And they would list all of these wonderful facilities they had for you to entertain yourself. And they were all the ones in Jackson Park. And it worked. I mean, they had, for decades, they got these crowds of people, rich white people coming up from the South, living in the Del Prado and also in the other hotels. And they were known by the locals, because there was a bit of a culture clash, as the yellow fever colony. So they were not entirely appreciated, but they brought their money. In the winter, the Del Prado had a different audience. 2 blocks the other way is the University of Chicago, and universities need hotels. So they had visiting professors and prospective students. And at academic conventions, the American Society of Naturalists has a convention in the Del Prado. And they, at this time, Chicago is a powerhouse in the Big Ten. And so there's all these Big Ten teams come and stay in the Del Prado because they can drill on the Midway and have their strategy sessions in the ballroom. And so it's very convenient to them. They also picked up, so there's all these founding people that they pulled in to start the university. They're giants in their field, and quite a few of them ended up living their whole time at the University of Chicago in the Del Prado, because these are indeed residential hotels in addition to more transient people hotel. And this is a photo of an actual suite in the Chicago Beach Hotel in 1905. And it shows just how much you would move in when you moved in and lived in the hotel. This is a news photo, and it's news because it was during a waiter's strike. That's why she's playing with her chafing dish. And the Chicago Beach Hotel in particular would advertise that businessmen in Chicago owed it to their families to spend the summer in the cool breezes of the lake and near all these recreational facilities, while the man of the house would take the train down to the hot, nasty city and go to work. So I kind of wonder if maybe that's what this family is. They definitely have a kid, because this is some weird bear puppet thing that's hanging from the chair. But just look at the number of photos and pictures they had brought to their hotel room. So the interesting thing to me about that story is it's 1895 to World War I. There are these number of waiters' strikes. So, the waiters were unionized, and they had quite a bit of power, and they seemed to have been very well paid. The sign of this was May 1st, 1893, which is the opening day of the fair. The White Waiters Union, which was about 700 members, mostly German, and the Black Waiters Union, which was 1,400 members, worked together to call a strike. And they're striking because there's fare concessionaires that have brought in these young women from rural areas to work in the various things at the fair. And the women are willing to work for $5 a week. And these guys are striking for $20 a week at a time when $13 a week was probably the average. So they're being, they're striking for more than the average kind of wage. The thing, it sounds like it's a leap, but in fact, that's what they were already making at the Hyde Park Hotel and the Holland Hotel. So they were being paid well above average. And it made me think about really what's going on here is that each of these hotels has hundreds of people working in it. There's so many hotels, we're talking thousands of jobs. So the hotel, this hotel district, this commercial hotel district that formed in Hyde Park is actually quite an economic engine for the neighborhood or for the surrounding neighborhoods. It's not entirely clear where everybody's living, but Paul Cornell actually builds an apartment building across the street from the Hyde Park Hotel so that the people working in the hotel would have a convenient and nice place to live. So some of them are actually living in Hyde Park. So the Del Prado, back to the Del Prado. The Del Prado was a particular target of this guy, Arthur Burge Farwell. He's the secretary of the Hyde Park Protective Association. And his mission in life is to crack down on vice in Hyde Park. And part of the issue is alcohol is not available in Hyde Park except between 55th and 57th on Lake Park. And that's because the railroad controls that street. Everywhere else is dry. Everywhere else it's legal to drink in your private house or a private club with paid membership, but it's not legal to just walk into the bar at the hotel. And this is a photo from the Tribune in 1911 of the illegal saloon inside the Del Prado Hotel. Illegal saloons were known as blind pigs. So Farwell says, this is a photo of the blind pig. And he takes it to the chief of police, who, according to the article, laughs noiselessly and tosses the photo. So that was not, he didn't get far that way. And then during the fair, he had provided citations for 1,500 violations of liquor laws. And those are mostly tossed. So it seems like maybe Farwell is more successful at harassing people than at actually successfully prosecuting them. So there's alcohol, and then there's gambling. So gambling was pretty legal for a while, and then it got more and more illegal across this period. One of the co-owners of the Del Prado Hotel is in fact one of the major bookies at the Washington Park racetrack, which is still operating south of Washington Park. And it makes sense that gambling was a very lucrative thing to get into around these hotels because you have a lot of bored rich people just hanging around. The year after this attempt to bust the blind pig, there's a bookie who passes on in the Del Prado, and his obituary says that he left an estate of $1 million in 1912 dollars. So yeah, it was pretty lucrative. And there's another one who made a lot of money. His name is Henry Tienen Jones. He was born into slavery in 1861, and his family came up to Chicago as soon as they could to get out of Alabama. He had, as a teenager, gotten into gambling, and by this time, he has an actual casino in Hyde Park, the Lakeside Casino, and he is providing roulette and dice and poker to his white customers. He's also running gambling operations inside the Chicago Beach Hotel and inside the Windermere. But he gets so sick of being harassed by Farwell that he closes down his Hyde Park operations and opens a jazz club in Bronzeville and becomes one of the policy kings. So he makes history up in Bronzeville and becomes a columnist in the Defender. So he has quite a long career. So meanwhile, the Chicago Beach Hotel. So they're not as interested in Jackson Park because they have enough land. They're creating their own lawn tennis, their own putting green, and their own, of course, private beach as their selling point. But they also have a leg up on Farwell. That Farwell takes them to court, and they argue in court that, in fact, they're not in Hyde Park. Hyde Park's boundaries were drawn in 1861, and all of this land has been created after 1861, and so they can serve alcohol. And it, this whole nature of the made land is, just ties it all up in court. So apparently, it seems before World War I to be a good period of time for the hotels. The Hyde Park Hotel actually doubles in size in 1915 in the same look. And then after World War I, you get a whole other look to the hotels, and you get a whole other explosion of the number of hotels being built. And this is from 1921. The hotels that have already been built gang together, at least these 10 do, and they start creating this idea in the newspaper that they are Hyde Park is Chicago's residential hotel center. They're competing with, there's Nurside hotels that are also doing block ads. And of course, the big ones are like the Edgewater and the Belden Stratton. There's really nice hotels up north. But they're pushing that they are the residential hotel center. They certainly create the idea that Hyde Park is a residential hotel center and a destination to come to. And they have advantages. And the biggest advantage is, again, this recreation, this green space in Jackson Park, which is so accessible, and the yachts and the Jackson Park Harbor. And of course, the fast train to downtown. But one of the things that they market, and of course, all the residential hotels market, is that living with these services means that you are freed from the tedious, worrisome duties that go with keeping house. And there are different little drawings that go with these ads. They quite often are showing you the things in Jackson Park, but this ad, I thought, brought home this idea. So they show you that you can hand your kids off to a nanny. You can have the bellhop carry your stuff and walk your dog. You can have this nice lady bring you your food. And you have the nice doorman. So you can, as it says down below, you can say with pride that you live in Hyde Park. So they pick up, so Farwell's still on the job. This is now Prohibition, so he's in his glory. But they pick up another hostile person, which is this University of Chicago sociologist, Norman Hainer. And he says that these are cauldrons of social and cultural evil. And why? Because women have dangerous leisure. They don't have to clean, they don't have to cook, they don't have to take care of the kids. They can live on their own. They don't even need families. This is tearing apart the fabric of Western civilization. I mean, he really goes that far. And it is noticeable that all of these big hotels have very active women's clubs who get put on lectures once a week and have guest speakers, and some of them are more oriented towards poets and writers, and some are more oriented towards, civic causes and politics. They put on classical music weekly. They have, more ordinary ones like bridge clubs, and some of them are illegal bridge clubs for money, but they're definitely pursuing their own interests. And it's noticeable, that there are people who have plenty of choice, who choose to have this lifestyle and have everything taken care of for them. And one of them that interested me was Edna Ferber, because Edna Ferber is a best-selling novelist. She's selling her books to the movies. She could have lived anywhere in the United States, but she chooses to live here in the residential hotels in Hyde Park. So she lives in the Windermere and later in the Sisson. Another one is Emily Taft Douglas in the 40s. She lives in the Windermere, and she runs for Congress and is very active in all these civic occasions, the Red Cross during the World War II. And it frees you up to do other things with your time. So the 1920s building boom is kind of crazy. By 1930, there are 100 hotels in Hyde Park. That is, structures that are at least 3 stories high and provide these services. They're fireproof. They're now using steel frame construction, and a whole bunch of them go tall. So you have 12 to 17-story buildings going up across, particularly East Hyde Park, the east side of the tracks. What interested me is you kind of get a little class difference, emphasized. So it's even spelled out in the architecture of what is the Cooper Carlton. The public buildings, 2 stories of public public rooms are differentiated. And then they have the sort of short-term, cheaper rooms. And these now have, if they have a kitchen at all, they have teeny tiny kitchenettes with teeny tiny appliances, which you'll still see in some apartments. And they have Murphy beds, so they're maximizing space. Murphy beds are the metal beds that you can fold up into the wall. And then up above, you can see is marked the expensive suites. These go up to 9, 10 rooms. So they're big and much more luxurious. So the first of these new style hotels is the Sisson, built by Harry Sisson. He wants everything state of the art. Everything is fancy. He tests out absolutely everything. And as soon as he decides it goes into the Sisson, he puts the logo on it. So if you ever see anything with that logo on, you know where it came from. The one quirky thing is nothing here has kitchenettes or kitchens. Because he thinks it's tacky to have the smell of food in the hallways. So you have to eat down here in the restaurant, which at least had nice lake views and really, really rich food, which would have been kind of tough to eat in every meal. So again, you have, I think his smallest was two rooms. He's aiming more for longer stay people. And then he has the big suites on top in the penthouse and a luxury kind of garden thing that you can get out and look at the lake and catch the breeze. This postcard I really enjoyed because it shows how they're advertising themselves, though these 2 things actually can't coexist. One burned down, the German building burned down before this was built. So this is the German building. It's an icon of Jackson Park. So one of the things he's signaling is, look, we're really close to all of these wonderful facilities in Jackson Park. And then the other is the roof of the Shoreland. So he's signaling we're in this luxury hotel community that, that Hyde Park is now famous for. And of course, the other thing that always amuses me is he never, the Sisson never admits that there's a hotel next door. The problem is for him is when this postcard is being made, the Sisson is in some trouble. And that's because Harry Sisson is a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And I need more research on this, and particularly in archives, but this is what I think is going on. So after World War I, the African-American population in Chicago doubles, though it's still a really low percentage of the total. But also you have this influx of immigrants from Europe, and so things are changing. And in 1919, there's this horrible riot, takes a week, and it's basically white gangs murdering African-Americans across the South Side. And most of it is to the north and west, but some of it's in Hyde Park, so the violence is around. And in 1922, there's a newspaper, a Klan newspaper that starts printing in Hyde Park, and it has Hyde Park businesses are advertising in it. So there's a kind of context for the fact that Harry Sisson is in the Klan. It's something other people are doing too. But they know it's bad because they're all anonymous. But he kind of outs himself in 1923. The city is starting to do a pushback. So the Grand Imperial Wizard and the Imperial Kleagle of the Klan come to Chicago because they're going to argue to City Hall to stop the pushback. And Sisson, has a 300-person dinner dance in their honor. Well, it sort of becomes obvious what's going on, and a crusading Catholic newspaper prints his name, and there's an immediate boycott. So the Catholic patrons all go to the hotel next door, the Jewish patrons all go to the hotel next door, and there's, as I said, a general pushback. So it's starting to hurt the Sisson. So he's out fairly soon, and they changed the name to the Sherry. So the hotel next door, which also pretends not to have a hotel next to it, is the Cooper Carlton. Cooper thinks he's a descendant of James Fenimore Cooper. So one of the things going on in the 20s is this decorative use of terracotta to make these buildings distinctive. And he uses his terracotta to put these giant Indian heads all around the top of the building, which are totally inappropriate to either the last of the Mohicans or certainly now, but there they are. But that's why they're Indian heads on a building that no longer is called the Cooper Carlton. They appeal more to short-term visitors, to travelers. They have advertised across the whole nation. You know, when you're in Chicago, stay at the Cooper Carlton. But they do have long-term residents up here in the suites. And one of them is Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And so he too, I mean, 1919 is a rough year, several directions. One is, of course, the riots. One is there's this huge Red Scare, and apparently he's a target. And there's 24-hour guards in the Cooper Carlton to protect the judge. But he's famous for what he does in 1919, which is he cleans up baseball. The Cooper Carlton exists for about 10 years as the Cooper Carlton, when what happens is the university buys the old Del Prado, and the owners have a wad of cash, so they come and they buy the Cooper Carlton and bring the name over. And when they bring the name over, they bring the old Del Prado ways. So the cigar store owner is busted as a bookie, and use the Crystal Ballroom for a 600-person biweekly Keno game that gets busted. And of course, it's prohibition. So the elevator guys and the bellhops get busted for selling pints of alcohol to the residents of the hotel. It's so one of the things that you bump into, everybody brags about that their hotel is the hotel where the American League team stayed when they played the White Sox. But I think the favored one was the Del Prado. And that's like even in 1935, there's 6 of the 7 teams that came into town to play the White Sox stayed in the Del Prado. The barber brags about, and talks about in an interview all the names of all the people whose hair he cut, and there's a resident who talks about popping down to the bamboo room and discovering they're sitting next to Babe Ruth. So it was a feature that seemed to exist more so in the Del Prado than the other hotels. So that brings us to the Windermere. So yeah, so the old hotels, the World's Fair hotels are kind of aging, and they update the old Windermere and stick a neon sign on top, but they decide to build a new Windermere right across the street. So they get known as Windermere West and Windermere East. And they hire Rapp and Rapp, who are famous as the designers of movie palaces that are being built in the 20s. And they come, and apparently the most movie palace thing they do is the portico, which apparently is much like the ticket kiosks that they built for their movie theaters. And I was glad with all that to discover that they had an actual movie star stay of the silent screen. Vilma Benke stayed in the Windermere in the 20s. With the Del Prado down on 53rd, they switched to being the main hotel for the university. So the Modern Language Association has a convention here, and there's a bunch of faculty stay here. Thomas Mann and Philip Roth and Hannah Arendt stay in the Windermere when they're associated with the university. And they put out the ad to pull in the Big Ten teams. They also have all the hotels. So their civic organizations are meeting in all the hotels. I mean, they all have that connection. But the Windermere seems to actually do some outreach to the community. And one of the things they do is they create this art gallery, and they reach out to the 57th Street Art Colony to show inside the Windermere to, of course, the rich patrons. Then there, of course, is the Chicago Beach Hotel. They too want to modernize by building a new hotel. Morgan has kept making land. They're now up to 16 acres, so they have the room. But one of the things that happens to them is they're tied up in litigation with the South Parks Commission, because the South Parks Commission wants to redo the entire lakefront. And so they're trying to get the riparian rights from everybody that's a landowner. And the riparian rights are the rights about when the land meets the water. So the Chicago Beach Hotel totally resists because the beach is their calling card. It's in their name. And this whole idea that they're exclusive, that if you're a rich person staying in the rich and expensive Chicago Beach Hotel, then you aren't mingling even with people staying in other hotels. You're only staying with the people in the hotel, and, you know, when you use their facilities. So they hang it up in court, and it's a very, you know, well, there's a lot of lawsuits that are famous in Chicago that involves the lakefront. But finally, the South Parks Commission kind of gives up, and they say, well, what if we make you 25 acres to your north, and you give us the riparian rights? Will that work? And the Morgan agrees. So South Parks Commission gets the lake, and what they do is tear down the old Chicago Beach Hotel, create Chicago Beach Drive, and they start building 22-story luxury co-op apartment buildings. So they start building the Narragansett, the Powhatan, and all of that collection of hotels back there that now is known as Indian Village. So what is the South Parks Commission up to? They meet with the Jackson Park Hotel Association, and they tell them all kinds of things are going to happen. And I think that's one reason why you get so many hotels being built, and you get this whole change to the skyline of Hyde Park in the 20s, because they think all of this traffic is coming. So the South Parks Commission tells them that there's going to be a World's Fair in 1933 for the 100th anniversary of the city. So they're going to you know, have a World's Fair. Well, where do you have a World's Fair? Well, it'll probably be in Jackson Park. And the Field Museums moved up to their new land up on Grant Park, and the Palace of Fine Arts is empty, and they say, well, maybe you'd make a convention center, so there'll be all this convention traffic. And they they are building this lakefront thing, which is going to be this most wonderful, you know, water playland thingy, and it'll be nationally famous. There'll be water pageants, and there'll be yacht clubs, and there'll be, oh, it's amazing what we're going to do. And there'll be all these people traveling all over the country to come here and stay in the hotels and play on our lakefront. And of course, none of these things are quite, you know, quite happening. The World's Fair is up where McCormick Place is, about 30 blocks to the north. The convention center doesn't happen. Instead, after 10 years, it becomes the Museum of Science and Industry. And the lakefront is, so they had promised, they said there was going to be a road that will connect them to the loop, which of course would be great, you know, better business. But what it is quite a large highway called the Leif Erikson Drive that cuts everybody off from the lake and cuts them off from the beach. And it doesn't get landscaped for years. So they finally put sod down, but there's actually a few years where people are parking their cars out on the point because it's just dirt. So it's not a good thing for the hotels. And of course, you know, so here's the poor shoreland, which gets built while this is going on. And this postcard, they're hoping for this kind of lakefront, and that's not what they get. But the shoreland doesn't rely on the lakefront in spite of the name. They're relying on the luxury and a connection, particularly to the golf course in Jackson Park. They host some big golf association meetings, including the stars like Bobby Jones, you know, come and stay in the shoreland. It's the most expensive of the hotels. It's, I think, the largest of the hotels, and it has really quite amazing things to entertain people with, including the 18-hole putting golf course that's in the basement, complete with a golf instructor and tournaments and a silver cup. So that was quite the deal. So everything is great in the shoreline. The lobby is this 2 stories high, Corinthian columns, huge chandeliers, palms, wicker. So that's, that's the, and there are marble staircases that lead up on either side to the Crystal Ballroom, which is the most big and glorious of the crystal ballrooms in the hotels. There's terracotta all over the outside, sort of Spanish Renaissance something. The Louis XVI room is where you eat dinner. It's got these big windows on both sides. So you have wonderful cross ventilation and of course, crystal chandeliers. And I like this room. It's relatively small. It's leatherette walls, and it's supposedly where Al Capone would come and play cards and have cigar. But the problem is, so the convention center doesn't happen. It's 1929, the crash. They're into the 30s. So the Shoreland actually goes through foreclosure. And when it comes out the other side, it's art moderne. This is a problem for the hotels, actually, that they have to keep updating. They have to keep looking modern. They have to look contemporary. And so this is the constant, renewal. So this is the lobby now. No more Corinthian columns at the top. And the chandeliers are these sort of Flash Gordon looking chandeliers. And this is an ad for a bachelor's room. So it shows you what a small room would look like. And it's almost like something that would be in a movie, which is probably no accident, since the movies start shaping our sense of what's stylish. And then there's the Piccadilly. I'm not sure the Piccadilly actually counts quite like a grand hotel in terms of the kinds of public spaces, but it had the Grand Theater, so I couldn't resist. The Piccadilly is built by the Schoenstadts, who are living up here on the top in this glorious penthouse. And they too turn to Rap and Rap, the movie guys. Schoenstadts have a chain of movie theaters, so this is going to be their flagship. And the thing I'm saddest about in terms of what's lost in Hyde Park is that I never got to see this theater, because it looks amazing. It was 3,200 seats, big stage, so it had vaudeville and other entertainment and big theater organ. So it was, absolutely state of the art. So now we're coming up on the 40s, and World War II brings the biggest change for any of them, which is the Chicago Beach Hotel gets taken over by the US Army for a hospital for the wounded. And then after the war, they decide to make it Fifth Army headquarters. And the Fifth Army is in charge of mobilizing National Guard. And there's a big armory out in Washington Park. So the National Guard mobilizes through that armory. And you get 1,600 servicemen and support staff working in the Fifth Army, and various other teams of people come through. So there's this presence of servicemen that are moving through Hyde Park. The other big change is Leif Erikson Drive becomes even wider, and it becomes Lakeshore Drive, and it cuts everybody off from the lakefront even more. But you can see at least they landscaped it. The other thing, though, the Shoreland's chugging along. They start in the 40s to broadcast big band music from the Crystal Ballroom, though the bands aren't exactly that famous, or at least not all of them. So one of them, I found out the band members actually had day jobs in the steel mills and were playing big band music at night. So, but there was music coming from the Shoreland. So we get to the 50s. And things are really starting to shift. So, but the Del Prado actually starts in the 40s. So people are starting to fly. Midway Airport is the airport. And so banks of room in the Del Prado are rented by United Airlines and American Airlines for the layovers for their pilots and stewardesses. So this is a photo of Doris Irwin, stewardess, taking the sun out on the point. The Piccadilly becomes the home base for the White Sox. So the White Sox, the families, they don't really want to invest in a house if they're going to get traded to another team. So there's a whole colony of White Sox families that live in the Piccadilly, and they get a certain amount of press coverage during the big run to the pennant in 1959. So this is one of the White Sox families. The wives form a colony and support each other. In the Shoreland, Jack Benny performs. He's invited as a fundraiser from various Jewish groups in East Hyde Park. And Duke Ellington performs in the Piccadilly Theater in 1961. And again, it's kind of a last gasp. It's a fundraiser. And then there's a question I've been asked about Elvis Presley. So Wikipedia does list Elvis Presley as someone who stayed in the Shoreland. And this is the thing. So you're looking for who's famous that stays in the Shoreland or in any of the hotels. And the thing is that the really glamorous hotels are actually the Edgewater, the Drake, the Bell and Stratton. So they're really, particularly in the 50s where you have younger stars, they stay up there. So I haven't proven that Elvis Presley stayed in the Shoreland, but I haven't proven he didn't. And if he did, it was in 1957 when he performed at the International Amphitheater. Mostly what it is the hotels, these hotels are aging. So it's an older generation that's performing in the hotels and staying in the hotels. But in terms of the Shoreland, it is glamorous enough that Marie Wilson stays there in 1954. She's a star of movies. She's in 54 a star of a television show. She's a comedian, and she's there with her fur cape and her $1,000 bracelet. And then you have long-term residents of the Shoreland. And I like to picture this as an elevator ride. So this is Bill Veeck. He's the notorious owner of the White Sox. He lived on the suite in the 7th floor. This is Jimmy Hoffa, who lived for 13 years in a suite on the 8th floor before he disappeared. And this is Milton Friedman, also notorious, also a resident of the Shoreland in the 50s. But also in the 50s is a huge change. Well, it starts in the 50s, continues through the 60s, and that's urban renewal comes to Hyde Park. This is an enormous topic, so I can't really get into the full ranges of it, but it does affect the hotels, and it affects them a couple of ways. And one is Hyde Park develops the reputation for crime, and it's well earned. So the trigger for urban renewal really is early in 1952, and in May 1952, 23% of all the crime in Chicago happens in Hyde Park. So it's bad, and everybody feels like something's got to change. One of the things that's happened is all of these old hotels from like the World's Fair and in between, the rooms have gotten divided and subdivided, and so they're smaller and smaller, poorer and poorer people are living in it. So the city planners decide what they need to do is decrease the density of Hyde Park, cut it in half. And if possible, in that way, force out the poor people and recreate Hyde Park as a middle-class suburb. So they tear down 880 buildings in the Hyde Park that's west of the tracks. They tear down, in particular, the commercial streets. So all these places where there were jazz clubs and, nightlife and artists' rooms and, all of these interesting stores and quirky things, they're gone. It is true that the buildings were kind of a wreck. They'd gotten old, and between the Depression and no building materials during World War II, they weren't well maintained. So they were a problem. And they tear down all the old hotels, anything before World War I. So they tear down the Beatrice down on 57th, and they tear down the Hyde Park Hotel. And the Tribune runs almost full-page obituary of the Hyde Park Hotel, where they talk about the glory days, they talk about how amazing it was and the Tiffany ceiling, and not one word about preservation. This just was not in the vocabulary. The only thing they fought to preserve was the Roby House in this era. So the hotels are pushed through FHA loan structures to turn into apartment buildings. And as they turn into apartment buildings, they're pushed to combine the rooms into larger apartments. So fewer people, larger apartments. And of course, with the hotels no longer being hotels, there's thousands of jobs disappearing in this period. So this is, I put this together just as a quick look at this, the scale. So you had, you know, little wooden buildings before the fair. You have in the turn of the century, the fair and the turn of the century, you go up to 3 to 6 stories along these streets with stores down below and multiple families living up above. And when this is, by the way, the same, as far as I can tell, it's the same block. And then after urban renewal, what you have is 8 single family houses. So it's, yeah, it's reducing density and looking modern, looking sleek, looking clean. So you got the 1960s. These are old hotels. Most of the smaller ones have moved into the apartment idea, but the Shoreland, Windermere, and Del Prado hold out with 25% of the rooms for short-term guests. They do reduce in scale, so the Shoreland goes down to 750 units. But one of the things they're looking at is these are still important community spaces. So this is the Pullman Porters Union that's using the Del Prado Crystal Ballroom. And also they're getting conventions. So the Shoreland has a big cat fanciers convention in 1965 with 300 cats and their owners and cat fanciers attending. So they're getting the traffic, but all their selling points have really gone away. You know, Jackson Park's a wreck, the airport's gone to O'Hare, and, you know, Hyde Park is unsafe and boring. So, you know, it's double whammy. And I think a really big thing too is the tastes in the 60s, you know, it's counterculture, space age, it's not old hotel. So they look at who would like old hotels, who would want services, and they start thinking about seniors. So a couple of the hotels really go into this idea that essentially of assisted living, of providing services, maybe even medical services for seniors. And the Shoreland actually signs a bunch of contracts. But I think the university may not have liked this. It's a little hard to tell because they were buying up dozens and dozens of big buildings all over the place and turning them into graduate student housing and undergraduate housing and staff housing. So they buy the hotels that are toying with this idea, but maybe they didn't like the idea. But they're stuck with the idea because they buy the Shoreland, they're going to turn it into an undergraduate dorm, and 100 of the seniors have contracts, and so they stay. But there isn't anywhere else to go. I mean, all the other buildings have been taken over with this other, with these new changes. So these are ladies who were living in the Shoreland when it was a dorm in the 70s. And 10 years later, there's still 45 seniors living in the Shoreland with the undergraduates. So where are you going to stay? So in the 50s, you get a couple of motels, because after all, it's more of a suburbia now. And what, you know, these perfectly ordinary, straightforward motels move in. 50th on the Lake still exists in different forms. It's gone through lots of identities. And the Shore Drive is torn down. It did a pretty steady decline into not being a place you would stay. As for all of these old buildings, the trouble is the university did not maintain the dorms. You know, there was a massive water leak in the Shoreland, and it just sat there for 25 years. I saw the Shoreland after the university got rid of it, and it was daunting, to say the least. And the other hotels too, they weren't maintained very well, and they turned into low rent housing. And so you have these beat up old buildings. But in the 80s, you start to get the idea of preservation more fervently held. And so people do the work to get these hotels on the National Register. And with the National Register, you get a tax break if you rehab them. And when the university, in the 2000s, when the university divests all of their residential buildings and new owners come in and take over a lot of the other buildings, these are developers who see this as, you know, modernize all the rooms and you know, restore parts of the old glory to the buildings, though it costs millions of dollars to do so. So they've all been freshened up and are looking pretty good, though they are rentals, not hotels. And the university finally said, we actually need a hotel. So the first thing they did is when they're doing Harper Court, the medical center needed people that needed a place for people to stay. And they helped bring in the Hyatt Place, perfectly routine Hyatt Place, nice, but you know, pretty standard. You can stay in a similar Hyatt Place in other cities. And they were overwhelmed with people renting. So the same developers took over other university land and developed Sophie, which is a return to a little bit of a destination hotel. It's rated #3 in the whole city of Chicago. So it's very popular, has a restaurant, and also pulls in the art of local artists, not unlike the old Windermere. And in September, there will be a third new hotel on the university campus, sort of taking over the role of the old Del Prado. It will be open to the public. It's not just for the university, and it'll have a restaurant down here and meeting rooms. And I think we'll have a last echo of the old idea of selling access to Jackson Park, because it'll be 4 blocks away from the Obama Center, which is going to open in 4 years. So this is a brief summary. Pretty much most of the ones I've talked about are gone. The others are, you can rent apartments in or buy a condo. And that's the end of my talk. And these are the sources of what I've gone to. So I guess I better stop sharing.
So thank you, Trish. And we can go to some of the questions in chat. So I think you've named quite a few, most of the distinguished guests who stayed at Hyde Park hotels, and we've talked about Elvis Presley. Let's see, can you speak to the role of elevators in creating conditions to allow the construction of taller hotels?
Oh yeah, no, that was, yeah, so the only one of the hotels I mentioned that didn't have an elevator was the Hyde Park house, the really old one. As soon as in 1888, he's got an elevator. It's a water-powered one. It's not like the Otis one. I don't know exactly how it worked, but it had an elevator. Yeah, well, I should say, so I've skimmed over a lot of details on some of the things. So the Hyde Park Hotel, the nice one in 1888, was built in stages. So he built it to 4 stories. Then he built it, when he realized the fair was coming, he pushed it up to 7 stories. So I'm not entirely sure whether the elevator was retrofitted when it went to 7, but yeah, that had an elevator. Yeah, it was particularly when you get to 12 and 17 stories. You know, you don't want to carry your bag up the stairs.
We also have a question: is who is in charge of the urban renewal? Who was the they, quote unquote?
Yeah, as I said, giant topic. So actually, I mean, so I went and was looking at the old 1950s documents a little to kind of check this out. The problem was, I mean, everybody was so alarmed by the crime that the community, actually there's this huge community meeting right after that May of 1952 in Mandel Hall, where a lot of people in the community are there going, what are we going to do? But the they becomes pretty solidly the university, the city, and the federal government. So there's a Department of Urban Renewal, you know, that seizes. So like the Hyde Park Hotel is simply seized. I mean, it doesn't have a choice. You don't have a choice. You know, if they came to take your property, it was gone. So it had the authority of the federal government as well as, but a lot of the planning was coming out of the university.
And a question, how discriminatory were the hotels? Could anyone stay there if they had the money?
So, I mean, is that a question about race, or is that?
Well, that the language was how discriminatory were the hotels?
Yeah, so
I guess.
Yeah, so it changed. So one of the things that I don't feel like I know quite enough about, but I've done a lot of work on the World's Fair, and I think there was this moment in the 1890s when things were a little more open. And there's a story about the Del Prado and the yellow fever colony. So there's a guy named Sam Ransom, and he's African-American. He is a graduate of Hyde Park High. He's a tremendous athlete. He is lettered for 4 years in 4 sports. And in his summers, he had worked as a bellhop at the Del Prado Hotel. He's so Stagg tries to recruit him to attend the University of Chicago, and he decides instead to go to Beloit. And the Beloit football team comes back to Chicago. They stay in the Del Prado because that's where the football teams like to stay. And he goes in to have dinner and sits down, and the yellow fever colony leaps to their feet. And it becomes this huge deal. It's articles in the Tribune, but it proves that, yeah, if you had the money, you could stay, probably up through World War I. And then I think, but again, this is not research I feel I've completely pinned down, but I think after World War I is when you start getting, people understanding that this is not a place where you can stay. And this is, what, I think I skipped over. So what really shows up to me is the changes in the 40s, when actually the ads for staff starts to define race. So maids wanted white only, like for the poinsettia, and waiters only, only African-American or colored at the time is what they said, in the Broadview. And so they're starting Filipino elevators operators for the Del Prado. So, there's this sort of defining race going on, particularly in the 40s, which is when you have the real restricted covenants and you have the real crackdown. So I think it changed across time. And then in the 50s, definitely, if you had the money, you could stay. It really shifted pretty fast. And so, that's one reason I put up the Pullman Porters Union, their meeting in the Del Prado, Duke Ellington's around. One of the stories I skipped over, I had to, as you can tell, I talked a long time and there's so much I missed. I wanted to squeeze in the Sutherland, but it just didn't really fit. It was a little too long a story. And that's a hotel that completely flipped. It was a white only hotel. And then in, I think it's the early 50s anyway, I think it's 52. It has new owners. They put in an African-American manager, and it completely flips to being African-American only. And it becomes the jazz mecca. It's just the most amazing list of performers that stay in the Sutherland. But it shows that by this time, it's tough, that it's all one, all another. And to give them credit, one of the goals of the urban renewal was to, in the end, have an integrated neighborhood, a middle class neighborhood, but nonetheless an integrated neighborhood. And, it was rocky, but, all the other places were doing this flip, whites would just, real estate agents were benefiting from whites, flight. So it's a big, complicated story, but I think it changed across time.
Just a quick question. When was the University of Chicago founded?
Oh, so yeah, so another story I missed over was they're founded exactly the time of the fair. They claim 1890 now. I'm not quite sure how they skated back in time, but originally it was 1892. So their first classes are the year before the fair. So they're building the buildings of the university at the same time the fair is being built. So it's the same time. And the Beatrice, and the story I skipped over was the Beatrice survived that long gap when nobody was showing up by renting their rooms to the women of the students of Chicago because the dorm wasn't built yet.
And just maybe a clarification, the address for the original Hyde Park house, perhaps it was 1800 East 53rd and not 5300 East?
Oh, well, I got all those from some authority.
Okay.
I would have to double check. There wasn't a 53rd. So it's really where the Watson's Tavern was.
Okay.
So it's somewhere. So yeah, so the Sisson, the Del Prado, they can both kind of claim the original Hyde Park house. It was somewhere in that space. Yeah. And
just if you could repeat, what hotel year was it that you mentioned the unions for both black and white waiters?
Yeah, so the one where they're really working together is the start of the World's Fair. So it's 1893.
Okay.
But it's clear that the Black Waiters Union was a powerhouse there for like 20 years. They don't call it restaurants too, for some reason. It's oyster houses. Hotels and oyster houses is what they're striking against.
So here's a question from a preservationist perspective. Which hotel would you like to have seen preserved rather than lost? Which features were particularly beautiful and valuable?
I think from the way people felt about the Hyde Park Hotel and the descriptions of the Tiffany. Oh, and I should add, so there is conceivably in existence the Tiffany ceiling, because now I'm blanking on her name. Len Dupre's wife was involved with HPKCC, and apparently HPKCC got the Tiffany ceiling, the marble lobby, and some of the terracotta to preserve from the destruction of the Hyde Park Hotel. The intensity of feeling around that is, I would have liked to have seen that and seen what it was they cared so much about.
Oh, it just came to mind